Hey everybody. So after an interesting turn of events, I am going to record the lecture, the remainder of the lecture for today. After we get some more information from the LSU faculty, then I'll have, I guess, more to tell you about what the rest of the class is going to look like. But we're just going to focus on today, and I will also let you know how things go with the guest speaker for today and as well as the food demo. So we left off talking about the definition of culinary medicine, and I mentioned that I liked this article by Dr. John Puma, where he defines culinary medicine and what does it do. So I really like his definition because it makes this culinary medicine idea more inclusive and describes a key characteristic that we're trying to teach our patients about how they can develop skills and develop a better understanding of how they can take charge of their own health and how they can cultivate skills to take charge of their own health. So Dr. Puma says that culinary medicine isn't a single specific diet. It's not a specific food or specific phytonutrient. And it's not, artsy fartsy cuisine either. It's not a rejection of Western medicine. It's this marriage of good food, good wholesome food, and medicine. So through culinary medicine, we can teach our patients how food can impact both their risk and their disease state. So from what we can kind of see as from the start to the end. So it's the food choices they make when they shop. It's what the food is available to them. It's how we cook that food. And it's how we eat that food. So each topic that we cover in the next 2 weeks, I hope that you are able to see it from the context of the patient, and I'm going to do my best to be able to portray that. And that carries us into your culminating project at the end of the 2 weeks is your cooking demo that you're going to give for a specific condition or targeted patient population. Because like I said in class, if you are able to truly understand and practice some of these ideals in your own life, then it's more it's a lot easier for you to be able to transfer that knowledge to your patients in a practical way. So I think it's really important for us to understand that culinary medicine or food as medicine isn't only for the Instagram influencers that you might know. In fact, it's really similar to something called MNT or medical nutrition therapy that dietitians have been practicing forever. In fact, that's one of the reasons why culinary medicine is kind of like that term that kind of turns a few dietitians off, because that's what MNT is to us. But over time, we've been able to collect data on specific dietary factors, diet plans and eating patterns, and how those affect health outcomes. So you see stuff like the Mediterranean diet, also known as Med Diet. There's the low glycemic index is pretty hot right now for type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome as well. But then you see things like legumes and oats for lowering cholesterol, nuts to help with metabolic syndrome as well. And of course, like baked and broiled fatty fish, particularly for heart health. So we put all of this together, and what this can do is make up culinary nutrition. And that is what is sort of the basis of the idea that food can be medicine. So it doesn't have to just be for healthy people. Culinary medicine can truly be for people who are living with certain conditions, and we can improve their outcome with those conditions through culinary medicine. So I included this final thought from Dr. Puma because I found it impactful as I read it, and it made me think about you all. So the goal of this class isn't just to teach you how to teach patients, but to show you how food can be a medicine in your own lifestyle so that you can adopt some of those practices, so you are better able to teach your patients, and they're going to be able to benefit from the practices that you have adopted and the knowledge that you've gained from that. So culinary medicine programs are, sort of the hot topic in higher education, in professional education. And we've seen several of these types of programs pop up around the country. So I recently went to FNCE, which is our annual food and nutrition conference and expo for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is our the largest American group of dietitians. And at that conference, I was able to listen to a session from a professor working, I believe, at UT, where they created a very successful culinary medicine course that had this sort of multidisciplinary approach to it, where they had med students paired with dietetic interns. And what they saw was that the dietetic interns were able to really infuse the culinary skills, the culinary labs with their nutrition knowledge. And that helped the med students, whereas the med students were really able to help the dietetic students, the dietetic interns, understand those disease processes. And together they were able to create this cohesive learning environment where everybody was able to sort of feed off of each other. And one of the takeaways for me from this presentation was that interprofessional education is so impactful to students. So each were able to collaborate and work with other disciplines, and at the same time working within sort of their own scope. And that helps you guys learn. So that's part of the reason why you're here. I'm here as a dietitian, and Chef Don Caston are here. So we're getting all of these sort of levels in to help you understand how this can impact your patients. So this poster session article that you see here is from Florida State University, and it shows another way that these programs can be measured as successful, just by encouraging different lifestyle practices among future physicians. And again, when you all learn these concepts, and you're better able to adopt those practices, then your patients are given more practical tools to make similar changes in their own lives. Okay, so to put sort of all of this together, what culinary medicine is an opportunity for any and everyone to adopt better food habits, food eating habits, and cooking habits that can help with all medical conditions or act as a preventative treatment as well. So it's not just for the biohacking group or, white collar individuals, it's for anybody. So as practitioners, we have to understand where certain people are coming from, what food is available to them, how we're speaking to them. Is that foreign? Is it a foreign concept? And to sort of break it down for them to be able to truly take something away from it. So what culinary medicine also is, it's an opportunity for us to help our patients expand their own knowledge of disease states. So giving them not only the tools to be able to cook and prepare a new meal, but how it actually impacts their health risk and their health outcomes. Like I said, it's an opportunity for interdisciplinary collaboration. So I think culinary medicine just builds a case for doctors to be able to work with dietitians, and dietitians who work with speech therapists, and dietitians who work with athletes, and dietitians who work in oncology, doctors who work in those fields too. So it shows that this relationship is really necessary, and hopefully can give you the tools for how to be able to talk to each other and communicate and work together within your own scope to really be able to treat patients as best as possible. And finally, one of my favorite aspects of culinary medicine is that it really teaches patients that they have skills and that they can develop skills to actively play a role in their own health and well-being. So instead of giving them just generic advice to include all these food groups or to eat fatty fish. Well, what is fatty fish? And how do you cook that fatty fish? Because if you have trout and you fry it, is that the same as having trout that's baked or broiled? So whenever you are able to approach that in a practical way, patients are going to undoubtedly be impacted by that because you are able to teach them in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that gives them tools to be able to improve their own health and well-being. So here are the student learning outcomes for this course. So by the end of our 2-week course, you will be able to discuss the health effects of food on the human body. You'll be able to determine appropriate foods and meals for promoting health and disease prevention. You'll be able to evaluate barriers to maintaining a healthy diet, including religious, cultural, and lifestyle components. And finally, you'll be able to prepare meals that promote health and reduce the risk of chronic disease. So I wouldn't be able to begin this course without just giving you a brief overview of what is a registered dietitian. So there's a lot more information in the scope of practice and the standards of practice for professional dietitians, the article that I posted to the Google Drive. But dietitians are known as the food and nutrition expert. So we receive education in the didactic program. We now have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. In 2024, that's going to change to a master's degree. Once we finish that, we have to move on to an accredited supervised practice program, which is pretty competitive. When I went through my matching process, the match rate was 50%. So it's actually been a little bit lower in the last couple of years. But after the supervised practice program, we have to pass the national CDR exam for registration for registered dietitians. And then, of course, we have to continue with professional education each registration round. So all of that takes about 6 years minimum to complete. And I just like to include that because I don't think every professional really understands what the background of a dietitian is. So after we become a dietitian, then we can specialize in specific areas. But dietitians have created opportunities for work in many, many different fields. And I have to include this picture because this is the registered dietitian who now works for Taco Bell. I recently read an article that Taco Bell sneakily became one of the healthiest fast food chains. And that's because they had this dietitian who was working originally in research and development. She took over the actual nutrition concept. So she made a lot of changes, and now they have a good bit of nutritious offerings on that Taco Bell menu now. So just as medical doctors can work in lots of different areas, so can registered dietitians. So the final thing that I like to say is that every registered dietitian is a nutritionist, but not every nutritionist is a registered dietitian. So this is there's a distinct difference between a nutritionist and a registered dietitian nutritionist. So nutritionist in the past hasn't been a specific term, I guess you could say. So registered dietitians were always, received that accredited training. They were registered through CDR, but nutritionist was a term that other people could pick up without that education and background. So in Louisiana, we have licensure laws that say nobody can call themselves a nutritionist without having that registered dietitian credential. So the big thing with registered dietitians is that we practice evidence-based nutrition. So if you've ever seen a quacky nutritionist, they're not a registered dietitian, hopefully most of the time. So with this, let me see if I can play this. Here, I had to sort of move this over so that I could do this. But you've all probably seen similar memes to this. So what is the dietitian? This is what my friends think I do. This is what my mom thinks I do. This is what society thinks I do. What health professionals think we do. A lot of times, other disciplines think that we're in there cooking the food for patients. Here's what we think we do with MNT and culinary medicine, and oftentimes this is what we do. So there's kind of an ongoing joke that dietitians become therapists because food is very intertwined with our psyche, and we have a lot of psychological connection with the food that we eat and why we eat and when we eat. So definitely always the case, but again, that can be said for other disciplines as well. I thought this one was also funny. I'll share the PowerPoint itself to the Google Drive without the recording, but had to include this one to be fair to you guys because I know medical doctors often are misunderstood as well, and y'all put in a lot of work too. Okay, so I mentioned that registered dietitians practice evidence-based nutrition. If this is a new term, just basically means that these recommendations that we provide are based on systematic research and not specific studies. We're not going to change practice based on one or two specific studies that may disagree with what is currently recommended at the time. This, presents its difficulties, but it also really just keeps our patients safe and make sure that we have a cohesive message or consistent message that we're sending to patients. So, of course, we can't always stick a person in a bubble and run all kinds of tests on them. That wouldn't be ethical as far as research standards go. So it is really difficult to be able to pinpoint specific nutrients and how they impact metabolic pathways or certain disease states or, risk. We have to go on the data that we can collect and analyze, and a lot of times we're having to look at specific eating patterns in populations rather than specific nutrients, because you never can control for everything in human nutrition. So that's one of the difficult things about evidence-based nutrition, but also and this again goes across to other disciplines, but there's so much conflicting information and misinformation out there. So I always like to bring up the example of, the cholesterol debate. So for the longest time, one of our recommendations was that we should limit cholesterol consumption to improve our own cholesterol numbers. Well, research continued to be done, and the findings were that cholesterol consumption wasn't impacting serum cholesterol. So for a longer period of time, there was confusion. Do we tell people to restrict cholesterol in their diet, or do we not tell them? Until finally we did take away that cholesterol recommendation. So the same thing can be said with sodium and saturated fat. Is it the source of that saturated fat, or is it saturated fat in general that impacts cardiovascular health? So all of these things we have to consider in that culture of conflicting data. So when it comes to the barriers to nutrition education and counseling, we have to think about those evidence-focused barriers on top of the typical health change barriers that we see, like readiness to change and health literacy, familial support, and of course finances are always going to be huge too. So one other thing that I want to make sure I discuss with y'all is that dietitians use what's called motivational interviewing, and I know that's something that's taught in your school as well. And through that, we are able to really cultivate motivation for behavior change in patients, whereas typical education, nutrition education, wouldn't be able to do that. So always trying to keep in mind whenever you are, or before you're making any suggestions to patients related to diet, kind of see where they're at, see how they're feeling, see what they're motivated by, because that's really going to impact the recommendations that you should make, and of course, impact how likely they are to actually adhere to those recommendations or goals. Okay, so as far as the relationship between the registered dietitian and medical doctor, there's going to be a lot of different instances where you're going to be able to work with a registered dietitian, but more often than not, it's going to take place in a clinical setting or the outpatient setting. So in a clinical setting, and what I mean by clinical is just in the hospital, there's always going to be a team of dietitians around, and each specific hospital is going to have a method for either triggering or consulting the registered dietitian based on specific conditions, disease states, whether it's an ulcer, they came in with CHF exacerbation, or they're newly diagnosed diabetic. So that, on top of many other different instances, specific hospitals are going to have policies that automatically trigger a nutrition consult. But on top of that, doctors can and should consult registered dietitians anytime that they feel like their patient could use some assistance in managing their diet to treat whatever illness they have. So the registered dietitian and doctor should work really closely to make this culinary medicine approach happen in all of these settings. And I would encourage you as a doctor to just kind of think about that in anywhere that you do work, to have a registered dietitian that you're closely connected with to be able to steer your patients to any time that they need some help in that regard.